everybody. So my name is Stacy Forsyth. So at Pacheco we do have several specialty courts. So unfortunately, as you know, the original presenter, she wasn't able to be here. For those of you that know her, she does a very thorough presentation. So we're going to use her PowerPoint. But what I would like to do is I want to send around a sign-in sheet just so I can get all the names of everybody that's here. So if we or you all want it, you can send out the PowerPoint. We just have to ask, make sure it's okay, and also be able to have a listserv so we can share information if you all are interested in that as well. So I'm just going to send this around the list. And if you can just click your name, contact information, and what court you're from.
You can also go online and download this document, which is called Tribal Healing to Wellness Courts, the 10 Key Components. And it's on the website of the Tribal Law and Policy Institute. Tribal Law and Policy Institute.
So just to kind of get a gauge of everybody that's here and how familiar you are, how many of you have actually seen this before? You've seen it online, been to a conference, a little familiar with it? So the 10 key components. So a lot of the courts use this, especially private courts, specialty courts, utilizing this foundation. And when you look at the tribal key components, also Jeff is going to intervene with the best practice centers, right? So those of you that have seen that before, think about the relationship of how these can work together. And by show of hands, who right now has an active alternative court in their jurisdiction? Several of you? Like right now, who has a veterans court, a healing wellness court, a drug court? Several of you?
Yeah.
How many of you are wanting to implement? Like you haven't done it yet and you're wanting to start? Are any of you brand new? Everybody has something in the back? No? Okay. Okay, so everybody is familiar then. So we're going to go through, and what I want to do is I want to ask questions, because a lot of times when we go to conferences and they're huge conferences, we have all these questions afterwards, like what does this look like in our court? What will this look like for our jurisdiction, and what's going to work for us? So culture and tradition. Does anybody right now have anything, even no matter how small or minor it is, have anything implemented in their court system that would cue somebody in that this is cultural tradition specific to this tribe or just Native Americans in general?
Whether it's like, there's a lot of us here from ICWA Family Treatment Court in Yellowstone County.
Okay, so Judge Susan.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm familiar with that court as well. And can you just tell us, any one of you that are here from the ICWA court, what is something that you brought in that isn't part of your normal court system that you would consider cultural tradition? Is it individuals that come to speak?
I think it was the bringing in Buick. It's our Billings Urban and Indian Health and Wellness Center as an alternative to the regular track of Rimrock Recovery Court. And so it is a more cultural and traditional based treatment session, like treatment facility than it is.
Okay, so was that part of your planning from the beginning, or is it something you brought in after?
Brand.
Okay, very beginning. Okay.
We also are inviting our tribal partners to come do a cross training. So for example, like the Northern Cheyenne tribe will be coming in October and doing a presentation, okay, for our team and actually our participants.
Okay, for the participants as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And so those of you that aren't familiar with the ICWA court in Yellowstone County, it was primarily based off of 3 tribes, right? Northern Cheyenne, Crow, and Fort Pat?
Yep.
Okay, and that was due to the involvement with a lot of social service work with the children that was going on. So geographically, for those of you that know where Billings is, Crow and Cheyenne are close, right? But why Fort Pat? way over 300 miles away in Northeast corner. Why Fort Peck? Anybody have any ideas why Fort Peck would be involved with that? So we really don't know, but my guess is, so I work with the family court and the IPWA cases, but when we go through our numbers, right, we go through our data. Our medical system, that's where people are life-flighted to. Anytime they're flown out of Fort Peck, they go to Billings. That's our primary medical, so it's that far away. But a lot of children that are born with, they're born addicted, right? We have a lot of mothers that are substance users, and the children we don't have the facilities in the northeast corner to be able to care for them. So they're flown out. Sometimes we don't know the purpose. So they're flown out. So a lot of them end up in Yellowstone County. So there are, the last numbers that we ran, we had about a little over 200 children that were in foster care. And there was 38 of them that had been placed in Yellowstone County at that time when we did the numbers. But percentage-wise, I think it was somewhere near 60% of them were originally removed from that county, from the hospitals. So that's my guess, why we ended up in IPWA court, because our numbers are so high in Yellowstone County due to medical facilities. So things like that, to think about outside the box, outside of what we're gonna go over here, why are some things the way they are? And trying to find out, so we know that's one of our root issues, is taking care of the mothers with the prenatal care, with the medical facilities that have, and really, the resources, there's not much we can do about it, that's gonna be instantaneously, but it's things that we can look forward to, right? Whether we're gonna lobby or have our government say, this is the issue we want for the state or for the feds, what can you do to try to alleviate some of these issues? So we'll begin off with the next slide, which is, and we're gonna go through what she has here. And we're gonna talk about sovereignty for the tribal courts that are here too. So the healing to wellness court components. So this is a picture of what they all are and what we're gonna talk about. But talking about the circle, right? Holistic. So the basis of this is we want this holistic approach to our treatment courts. And a lot of these you need to do at the very beginning. Some will come later. Some you're gonna figure out what works and what doesn't work. So keeping in mind that it's not start to end. There's a lot of in-between stuff that goes on. So key component number 1, talking about nation building. Has anybody in here ever read Native Nation Rebuilding? Jorgensen. So it's kind of old, it's 2007, but this book, if you're interested in it, it's really good for anyone. But I also think that tribal leaders, if you are one or you're going to become one, that you should read this book, because a lot of what they talk about in there, not just sustaining economies, but also looking at how you're going to develop your, I guess, the social issues that you have, the severe social issues. What is it that your community is struggling with, and how can you deal with that? So a lot of what's in that literature is also part of this. It's part of this holistic approach to treatment courts. The team approach. So we heard earlier about the team approach and having those 7 key members to the team. But if you're like Fort Peck, where you're out there in the middle of nowhere, sometimes it's hard. So the urban areas, one thing when you look at Yellowstone County, because we did recently send a team to the DUI court, and they came back and they were so amazed that all of the team members that were there, all of the resources, and that there was a lab at the court, and I'm like, what? We send things to the lab, we hope that they come back, so looking at that, what if we don't have those resources, what do we do? So, internally we have developed our own means that work for us, but for the team approach, law enforcement, they had them at the end there, and they said they may not make it or break it for the team. But for law enforcement, right now, we're trying something new at Fort Peck because our law enforcement is, we do have a cross-step agreements, we have a lot of agencies, but we're short-staffed, they're busy. And we used to have a county deputy that would come. The one benefit from that I can see the difference between now and not having them is that every week the clients knew that he was gonna be there. And so he would go on the system, he'd look up their name before court, and he would say, okay, we had contact with this person. And even if they're in a car with somebody who had gotten stopped, their name goes into the system, right? So he would say, okay, well, we know that you were with so-and-so. So when they came, they're self-reporting before they even come to court because they already know that their name is gonna come up, and they'll tell probation or the coordinator, they'll tell somebody. And they tell me as a judge also, like, oh, hey, this happened, but I wasn't doing anything, this is what happened, they're explaining themselves. So that part we miss having those eyes on, right? The supervision is one of the main things. When people know that they're being watched, their behaviors are going to be structured to what is expected of them. So we don't have them there, but we do have a tribal security that we're now bringing in. We talked about MOUs, MOAs. So looking for those type of resources, whether it's maybe your housing department has a security, and maybe housing is going to allow them to check on people for you, not necessarily going out knocking on doors, but just saying, hey, so-and-so, we saw them, or we had a report on them. Some type of supervision where they're being accountable. For ours, there's a tribal security department that's recent, and it's almost like a neighborhood watch. They can't stop and contain, they can't arrest, they can't charge, but they're constantly out. They're driving the streets, driving the reservation, they're making calls into 911, but giving them a list of names saying, hey, these are the people that are in specialty courts, and what we would like you to do is to come to court so they know you, they know your program's involved, and they know that when you guys are out and about, we're gonna be getting reports back from them. And
The other thing I was gonna mention, Judge, is that tribal teams usually are different than state teams. The tribal teams that I'm aware of have a tribal council member on them possibly. I have the cultural director for the tribe on the team, an elder, so as part of the sovereignty, you should feel free to put on the team whoever you think will add to the team from the standpoint of helping the participants ultimately.
And that's a good point. So tribal leaders, and I think there are some tribal leaders over here. I know I saw this one earlier, is getting them involved. And with our juvenile healing to wellness court, that was the approach at the beginning, is get the tribal leaders here so they can see what the actual issues are and where these gaps are and how we're trying to fill them and what we need from them. Because without your tribal leaders, one of the benefits of being a tribe is that, our government, we have close contact with them, right? It's not like the state or the federal government where you have to go through all of these. I mean, some of you are probably closely related to your tribal leaders. You can probably call them up on your cell phone or, Facebook message them and say, hey, this is what's going on, So the support that you can get from them is going to be really, really good if they understand what it is you're trying to do. And they understand, what are the issues and how are we trying to get these issues addressed. And then also coming up with solutions. They said everybody is different with their tribal governments, but ours are there every day. I know some aren't, but they're supposed to be there every day. But they hear a lot of issues from other areas, right? So we don't know what's going on with, I'll use housing again, we don't know what's going on with housing. So when we talk about, homelessness or where you're living, and a lot of our families are living in one house. We have 3 to 4 families in one house. But we may not know why, unless you're sharing with us. But then we also find out from housing, or resolution logs, or talking to them, like, okay, we see what's going on now. There's drug usage, their drug policy changed, and now if they test for meth, they're getting kicked out, you know, and in the court system, we're seeing these evictions come through as well, so there's a lot of other areas where we can find information, but tribal leadership is very important to the beginning of your team, but also to keep it sustained, right? Because if you want funding from your tribe, they have to see the benefit of it. The referral points in the legal process, so everybody is gonna be different. Everybody's gonna be different. So this part, for me, I believe as your team is developing, your policies are developing, you know, this is gonna change. It's not always going to stay the same, but the legal process. So one of the things that we went through at the beginning is, this is a family healing to wellness court. It's not just a straight drug court where that would be just adults with criminal activity. We look more at the families that are coming through child dependency, child neglect cases. So ours was focused on that, but we ran into, well, what about so-and-so? Because our social service, it isn't tribal right now, it's a BIA and CFF, so we have a MOU with the state, and we were looking at, okay, so what is it that we want to do with this? Our focus was to reunify families. So how do we do that? We left the children and the cases in the family court, and there's a lot of stipulations, as you guys know, for funding, right? So we had to make sure those cases were being heard for the child, they were updating, and we took the parents, and we're focused on getting those parents to that case plan, to that service treatment agreement, whatever it was that they had to do in order to reunify. So that was our focus. Now, it did change as we go through because we found criminal cases that the children hadn't been removed, but they were probably on the verge of that happening. If this case was adjudicated, if they had another incident like that, and sometimes the prosecutors would say, hey, can you take this case? Can they go through here as a method of a deferment, of a whether it was a straight deferment or imposition of sentence or whatever the case may be with the plea agreement. So that was another one. Another one we had is mom coming in and I'm having custody issues with family. Social services said that if they have another call, they're gonna take my kid, self-referral, and they're coming in on their own. So then we had to figure out, can we do this, can we not do this? Like, nothing says we can, so we're gonna do it. You know, so we started taking in a lot of different individuals from different areas that we didn't initially plan to do, but it worked out. And we also took one from another jurisdiction, and it was a state. We didn't have an MOU or MOA in place, but we did it anyway because the other jurisdiction agreed to it. And the incident was located, you know, hundreds of miles away, and they lived over here, so the jurisdiction said, well, it makes more sense to have you drug test, have them check in with you, do that. So that worked out well, and it's actually our DOI court, and it was Yellowstone County, so she was actually graduating. Like, it worked out to have her be at home and to do all these services there, rather than trying to find money to get back to Billings every so often, so many times a month. So the legal process, you know, what is that gonna look like for you? And we talked about sovereignty, so that's one of the main things is you can do what you want to do. Some of you might be limited by grants, and maybe your grant says there's certain things that you can or can't do. And maybe you have other policies that limit you as well. But looking at those, making those changes with your tribal leaders, your legislators, and figuring out what is the issue that we have. Because although methamphetamine was big, fentanyl is becoming bigger now, alcohol is still a big issue. And we tend to forget about that, you know, so alcohol for our reservation, it's still very prevalent. And, you know, we tend to focus on the drugs, right, because that seems to be having the most detrimental effect right now. But the alcohol, we've had a lot of young people under the age of 40 that have passed away in the past several years from alcohol. You know, so that's one of the things that we try to stay focused on as well, and not just say it's drugs. So looking at the civil dependency cases, do any of you in here right now have a family healing to wellness court that focuses on the dependency cases? Nobody? Okay. So that's something that may be a little bit different. If you have an adult drug court and you wanna do this, maybe it's something that can go hand in hand with it. Did you have anything for this, Sergeant?
No.
Okay.
You wanna go to 3?
We'll go to the next one. So the one thing I want to say is, at the very end there, he had the question about justice reform. And for those of you that have been keeping up with the news on that, so we talked about the justice system, the rates, even if you Google this, the incarceration rates are enormous. The United States incarcerates so many people that if you were into privatization of institutions, you'd be a millionaire by now. We tend to look at that as that's our punishment, right? We're just gonna throw them in jail. And going back to our leadership standpoint, those that have, and I know some of you do, especially in Montana, there's Facebook groups, right? And people wanna put information on there, and then you get a slew of comments about what's the tribal government gonna do about this, and it just, I can't comment. A lot of times I want to, and I'm like, oh my God. So the viewpoint of people where they think that the tribal government has all the answers is to me, those are the ones that we need to get them involved and get them educated and say, okay, this is what's going on, and we would really like your help because you're very vocal on Facebook. You have a lot to offer us, and it's really hard. Those are, I'm sure a lot of you deal with a lot of disgruntled people. And one of the comments I had read is, one of the guys says, I'm not a tribal member and I don't work in tribal government, but man, it was all about bonuses. It was about people getting bonuses at work. And it was like, if I had to deal with all you disgruntled, disrespectful people, I'd want a bonus too, And I was like, okay, there's a different viewpoint. And he was like, and he's a local community guy, and he put that in there, so there's a lot of other comments. And sometimes I read those. I don't get on Facebook much, but sometimes I read those and I get caught up in them. But it gets me thinking, right? Like, what can I do to help get this information out? Because a lot of times in court, there's not a lot of information that goes out. You hear all the negative stuff. You hear who got charged and who's in jail, but you don't hear all the positive stuff, all the positive things that are going on, and talking about a program versus a model. So the justice reform model, and I really believe in what he said. Should these be models, not just for us, but across the United States? Yeah, they should be. I mean, there's a lot of research on incarceration and what it does, and we have a lot of family and people we know that are incarcerated for a lot of their life, and then they become institutionalized. So working on reentry programs, that's another big thing for governments. Our government is putting out, the federal government, money for that. So those reentry programs feeding into, your wellness court models as well. Is that something that might be a treatment court for you, the reentry program? Looking at all of those and how it could work in your community. Screening and eligibility. So the screening process, one of the things that we lacked with ours at the very beginning was the clinical portion of it with mental health. That was a big one for us because our Indian Health Service can't keep people there because due to lack of housing, remoteness, and just being able to get professionals to come in to fill those positions. They're always open, so if you guys know anybody, apply at usajobs.gov. But we do have one. We have one that has stayed there, and she's from there, so she's like vested right into the community. So she has a reason that she wants to be there to help people, but she also tries to help recruit. So our mental health services are very slim. We do have a program some of you may have heard about, but the acronym is HPDP, Health Prevention or Health Promotion Disease Prevention. And this is, it is an arm of the tribes, it's a tribal entity, but they've geared off to like third-party billing to be able to bring in professionals, and they have, we do have a new wellness center in Poplar. So it's program that is really working hard to bring in outside professionals. And they have been doing a good job at that, but they were mostly geared towards the juveniles. And they're trying to be able to branch out to the adult side, so we've gotten them to be able to go to the jail once a week. They're working on them getting into the juvenile detention center, but they've been there, and it's something that we hadn't tapped into. You know, we had invited them to the table, they were busy, so we just kind of bug them until we could get answers, and then you get tribal leadership involved, say, hey, can you help us out, kind of thing. So utilizing whatever you can find to bring them in for whatever you're missing. And telehealth, and I think there's on the agenda, utilizing those services. A lot of the clients are eligible for Medicaid. I know there's some new insurances, Cover Up Montana, I think, and the Montana State has the children's insurance. But having somebody that's there available to be able to give them this information, sign them up for this, get the telehealth, and there are times where we have clients come in, like use our computer, even during COVID for visitations with children, you know, come in here and do this, and being able to be a service and a resource for them at the same time.
This component stresses 3 types of screening and assessment. One is the legal screening, which is usually done by a prosecutor or maybe a public defender, maybe a probation officer. The second is a general screening to determine whether somebody has a drug dependence, an alcohol and drug dependence. And that's usually done before someone is officially brought into a healing to wellness court. And so that's a fairly short screening that may take 20 to 30 minutes. And then the third piece is the full biopsychosocial assessment that usually is done by the treatment program after the candidate has been accepted into the healing to wellness court. So key component number 3 stresses those 3 components as well.
So those assessment tools, you know, most of them cost money. And so that's another thing that we struggled with is, what is it that we're looking for? There are some free ones online, but ours ended up being very basic for the eligibility part of it. And the legal process, we do have a prosecutor and public defender that are part of the court, and generally they work really well together. They figure out, okay, is this a good candidate, and they do joint agreements for it. Makes our side a lot easier when you have that legal process down, and they do that outside of the courtroom. A while back, years ago, one of the things that we couldn't get down and get a real good understanding of how it works is, you know, how far does the prosecutor and public defender, the roles that they play. So there is a printout out there, very useful, because it's non-adversarial, right? We don't want them arguing about that legal case in the wellness court, which in the past, you know, and it's the right people, right, that can get along in there from those offices and have the mindset of why we're here. We're not here for the criminal portion of it, we're here for the treatment and healing portion of it. So that it can create issues if you are unsure about, you know, putting those guidelines about it's non-adversarial. So we're not gonna do that here, go somewhere else and do that. So it doesn't create any of that tension or friction within the team. Treatment rehabilitation, so the ones that are here from tribes, who is it that you currently use for inpatient treatment? We use VOA in Sheridan, Wyoming. Does anybody else use VOA?
We did in the past.
In the past?
We've been using Rocky Mountain
Okay.
in Great Falls.
Okay, and so that one, how do you guys pay for that? Was it through tribal funds?
The treatment dollars that we receive.
Okay. And that one's private, right? Is Rocky Mountain private?
Yes.
Okay. So that's where tribes and others can run into issues is who's gonna pay for that. A lot of them in the state do take the insurance, or they take Medicaid. VOA, the reason why we use it, and I think, do we have Pamela, I don't know if she's another one? But Madonna would know too, with VOA, the Volunteers of America, it's considered, I guess, free bed space. So, I mean, we do have to pay, but it's not as much. And that's the source for us, but you know, we're by Canada, North Dakota, and we're sending our people all the way down to Sheridan, Wyoming. And they meet us in Miles City, which is not really the halfway point, but they meet us there and they're accommodating to us. So those that do have Medicaid, you know, we can have them apply to MCDC or RIMROC, you know, but there's still a cost associated with it. So making sure that, you know, your funding sources are gonna be able to cover, and honestly, by the end of the year right now, like, we're out of money, right? We don't have the money to send people to treatment, so we end up running into this in the summertime, and we're like, okay, what are we gonna do? You know, so have those plans in place is, if your treatment is contingent based off a certain pot of money, you know, how is that going to work? And you know, looking at the treatment options, I know the whole northeast corner of Montana doesn't have anything with inpatient. It's not just FORPAC, it's everybody there. And I know we have legislated to the senators before about having mental health resources available, but also the inpatient portion of it, because it's not just FORPAC in that area struggling with that. And looking at what other sources, so telehealth, telemed, you know, a lot of those that are more readily available now since COVID, those are resources that you can look into for free at times, even if you don't have insurance. One of the things that recently, FORPAC Community College, you know, they had gotten a lot of money during COVID, and so they were able to give stipends. So it was an enticement to try to get our clients to go to college, and they get a laptop, they get a stipend, you know, they just have to go to school and keep up their grades. But they have a resource, what is it called? Is it Safe Talk?
Yes,
Safe Talk. So they have a resource that they send out to all the students. And even if you took one class, and so I take Nakota, Assiniboine class, I'm eligible for that. And it's a free resource that is for the students, like one class, you're eligible for it. So we try to tell people that, like, okay, sign up for the regalia making class or the beading class, and then you have, you know, you have access to these resources. And the Safe Talk is, I'm gonna refer to my husband on this because he was the one that told me about it. I got the email, I got the text, and I was like, okay. And he was like, no, you should really use that. And so he was the one that cued me in on it, like, hey, this is a good free resource. And it was actually an individual that was licensed in Montana, but not from our area, that was doing the talking and the interaction. So it's not like, it wasn't somebody, because I was expecting somebody from like Arizona or whatever. She was actually licensed in Montana, so I'm like, okay, well, maybe she's not from Montana, but she's licensed here, so it gives you another opportunity to be able to engage them not only in that service, but also the education part of it, because the community college offers HiSET. I know it's GED. GED has moved to the HiSET, and one of the issues that we had with trying to send the individuals there is we did not know, when we talked about screening tools, illiteracy. There was a lot of them that we didn't realize that either they couldn't read or they had a really hard time, they hadn't read it in a long time. So there's another tool that we have that our education department was using, a SALIS, for those of you that are familiar with that, and we use it in the schools as well. But utilizing that through our education to have them get on there to take the testing, and it's just a reading map. And it tells you at what grade level you are. And the one time that we tested, nobody was above a 4th grade reading level. So we were like, okay, we gotta step back and figure out what are we doing? Because if we're doing interactive journaling, which our LAC does with them, how do we know that they're really understanding what we're having them do? And you can tell by their writing, because when they do journaling, you can tell by their writing that they're struggling. And so making sure that they're capable of doing what you're asking them to do is very important, and part of that is with the assessment. Rehabilitation, how many of you have outpatient services that are, I know the urban areas do, for the outlying people, you have outpatient that's right there in your town or your community or right close by. Does almost everybody have outpatient services available to them? Yeah. Okay, Rocky Boy does, right? They have outpatient. Northern Cheyenne, okay. Okay, so we have an outpatient service, and it's a tribal program, but there's also a state program too. But utilizing those outpatient services, because what we heard earlier is, treatment is part of the very beginning. You want to get them to treatment, but sometimes you just can't. I mean, whether it's funding, whether it's, finding a place to send them, and sometimes you can't. So we utilize our outpatient services or our LACs to do one-on-ones with them until we can get them that. And we've had people that have been in our court for a substantial amount of time before they even got to go to treatment. And it ended up working, but I know that it's really hard if they don't know the tools and they don't know what's expected of them to be able to keep them in the flow of things if they don't have that treatment portion of it. Okay, we can go to the next one.
I want to mention one resource. There is a publication called, I think it's Native American Behavioral Health, and it's a SAMHSA. Everybody familiar with SAMHSA? Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. It's a treatment improvement protocol called the TIP, and it's number 61. And it is a really great publication for behavioral health for Native Americans. And it talks about all kinds of treatment and rehabilitation issues. For example, some people that will come into your drug court are pretty assimilated, probably don't want to have a lot to do with cultural issues. On the other hand, there will be people that will come in that are very eager to participate in ceremonies and sweats and powwows and different issues. And it talks about how to assess that cultural level in participants that come in, just as an example. But it's really a great publication. Sean Baer, who's going to do some additional presentations at this conference, was part of writing it. And I would encourage you to go online and find Treatment Improvement Protocol number 61 and download it. It's just an excellent publication.
What was that website again, please?
Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, SAMPHSA. I think that's right. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
SAMHSA.
Yeah. Okay,
So,
you ready to go on to
before
five?
we move on,
Okay.
I did want to talk about, reminded me when I was taking notes here, the cultural portion of it. So when we talk about the holistic, because one of the things that we try to stress, and also the components do, is it's not just about sobriety, it's about recovery. And those that have worked with addiction or have had an addiction themselves or still do, the recovery portion of it, it's a lifestyle change, and that's what we try to talk about, to discuss, to say, it's not just getting sober, because we run into the whole family, the whole friends, everything changing for them, and a lot of them during this time period, they just can't do that. I mean, they may not have the financial means to do that, they're dependent on somebody, they are codependent, the codependency, it does get addressed in treatment, and sometimes people need more help with that, and when we see it in court, because some courts don't allow couples to be in, some do, we do, but we see the codependency, and it happens even in front of us, and we're like, wow, like, what do we do about this? Because none of us in there are trained in clinical matters of that, so we had books, and Google things and try to get information from other resources on, how do we talk to them about that? How do we get them to see what they're doing to each other? And then we can see them fluctuate, like one's on a high, one's on a low, then the other one comes on a low, and then, they're in there blaming each other, and one's talking to one team member and the other one to the other, and they're manipulating each other, and it's like, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't have couples, but the whole point of us is family reunification, so we have to, so we struggle with that still, because, the resources just aren't there for the codependency portion of it. And also the cultural portion of it. One of the things that we found out when we started talking more about that piece of it is, although most of our clients have lived on the reservation their whole lives, none of them had ever put up a teepee. And when we did that, it was exciting because a lot of them were like, "Oh, I've never done this before. Like, I've been to a powwow. I walk down there and I see teepees, but they've never actually touched one." So talking about the teepee itself and telling stories. We brought in stick game, so we did stick game with them, and it was fun. They enjoyed it. They wanted to do it more. Invited them to an EP, sweat, and some of them were like, yeah, I want to do that, I haven't done that, and some of them were like, oh, I've never done that ever, I've never even been to a sweat, like, what do I do, what do I wear, and so we try to make them as comfortable as possible, inviting them out to our singings that we have, ceremonial singings before we have the medicine lodge, and then the Sundance, inviting them out to the Sundance, and trying to get them familiar with what it's about, talking about it, and then actually getting them to come. And we had one, he came, and he's graduated now, but he ended up staying with the ceremony, and he danced in the lodge for 4 years, and he got an Indian name, and that was the other thing is, the time we asked, and there was quite a few in there at the time, maybe like 25, 2 of them had Indian names. And so we talked about identity, and family structure. And, we look at the blood quantum, and I hate blood quantum, but we were looking at it, and we're like, some of these, they're full bloods on the rolls, and they don't have an Indian name, and they don't know their family past maybe their parents or grandparents. And some of them had been in the system, right? They were fostered out, and they came back. And so going through that with them and having them write down, using your tribal enrollment, maybe PIA, and getting family trees and saying, okay, look where you come from. And Fort Peck is different in the sense that we have a lot of different bands that are there. So we have Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, Nakoda, or Nakona for the Assiniboine people. And the Assiniboine are actually split between Fort Peck and Belknap. And they have a lot of relatives on those reservations. But a lot of them from Fort Peck, they came, their sister walked in, their Hunkpapa from Standing Rock. A lot of them are, they're connected to Sitting Bull because that's where he went up to Canada, right? And they dropped off people there. And a lot of them, their histories are from South Dakota, but they've never been. So just telling them about their family and the significance of, a lot of those struggles and the like the perseverance or showing them that, the resiliency and where it comes from. And that's, part of the identity. Actually, Fort Peck had John Hopkins come in a while back, and they did a small group study, and it was in regards to those that were struggling with alcohol. And they took a group of people, and they found out a little bit about them, and so they kind of split them up without telling them who had an Indian name and who didn't. And they sent them about their ways. They didn't, nothing in particular, they didn't require them to do anything in particular, but they studied them as they went. Some of them were, they were all still using alcohol at some point. But what they found out is that when the family had a death, the family had a sickness, or they had a parent or grandparent that was ill, needed somebody to take care of them. And there was a lot that came from the study, but the one portion I want to talk about is those that had an Indian name and they were close with their family, they were more apt to stop using alcohol when they were needed. And they were there for their family, and they understood their family structure, not so much their history, but their family structure, and when they were needed to be relied and dependent upon, they could. And so talking about identity, and you'll hear this in a lot of different arenas, is knowing who you are. So you're able to, because especially in our court, we want them to be able to tell their children, this is your family, and these are your relatives, because, we know the jokes about your cousins, this is your cousin, bring somebody home, or am I related to them? Yeah, you're related to them, and not knowing, and it happens, and, I was told a long time ago, there's 7 main families on Fort Peck. So you're all probably related somehow or another, just how distant is that? And it's true, you meet somebody, oh yeah, that's my relative. And it's hard as a judge too, though, so many judges in here, probably don't run into this in Billings where you have your aunties coming up and, guilty or not guilty, I can't, sometimes you just can't because there's not another judge available, so you have to be able to learn how to deal with those close relationships, especially in your treatment courts, because if they know you and they're familiar with you, they might expect something from you, so you have to be clear with setting those boundaries. Okay, I think that's all. The treatment plan developed, we utilize our outpatient, our LAC to tell us, what is this treatment plan and how can we keep them on track with it. And talking about sanctioning, incentivizing, the hardest thing for us was incentivizing. We had to come up with ideas that aren't going to cost a lot of money. And, we were able to get money from our tribal funds, and, not much, but, we found some of the incentives that they liked were things that weren't that costly. And it's like laundry soap. We want laundry soap or clothes, a jacket. And I'm like, okay, well, we can do that, whereas some programs can give bigger incentives, we couldn't, and we used a lot of the praise, doing certificates, looking at the sanction part of it, at the very beginning, we did put people in jail, a lot. And then we learned, okay, this isn't working. I mean, one guy, he said, I already know I'm going to jail, and I actually kind of like jail because I know I can sleep, and nobody's going to bother me, and I know I can eat. And he said, I'm not going to freeze in winter. So for him, it wasn't a sanction. He enjoyed that, and he said, I'd rather go to jail than do this or that. And so we're like, okay, well, what are we going to do, because that's not really working. And then our jail is always full, so putting them in jail, we had to think of something else. And one of the things and we read it somewhere, so we're like, okay, we're gonna have them do things that maybe it would get them more involved with the community. We're gonna say, we're not gonna use the word sanction, we're gonna say, okay, because you didn't do this, now you're gonna have to do this, but we also wanted to see if maybe it was something that could develop a skill set. So for example, using community service as that sanction without saying it's a sanction. Okay, if you guys don't show up to test today, then we're gonna have you come over here and we're gonna have you clean a yard. We're gonna have you do somebody's dishes, we're gonna have you come in and clean the courtroom. Like, that was one of the big ones for us, because we didn't have a cleaning person for a long time. Like, we all know you're gonna start cleaning and doing the lights and mopping, and some of them liked it. Like, the one girl's like, oh, I like cleaning, I love cleaning. I'm like, oh, good, well, you can come and do that on your own if you want to, you don't have to be told to. And some of them wanted to help out like that, like they wanted to feel useful. They wanted to feel like they had something to do and somebody was giving them recognition for it, and they enjoyed it. But we also wanted to see if that's something that could develop into, maybe it's a skill set, where we can say, all right, you don't need to have, all this education to just go get a job, but you might need to get your HISA or your GED or whatever the case may be. But I think it also led our tribes to believe, because we did have a policy in place at one time where it said you have to have a high school diploma or a GED to get any tribal job, like anything. And so we're like, okay, why, if they're going to be a maintenance person or a janitor, and why do they have to have that? And driver's license, everybody had to have a driver's license. We're like, you're not driving. Like, why do they need a driver's license? So it did. And we had this too in our policies, like, these are some of the goals. They weren't mandatory, they were just some of the goals. But a lot of them were like, well, I don't have a license, I don't have a car, I'm never gonna drive, like, why do I need a driver's license? Yeah, okay, well, maybe you don't, but maybe it's something that could help you get a job that you want. And making some of those things optional, not mandatory, but also, as a tribe, they changed it. Like, they changed those policies or those HR rules they had in place so people could get employed. Okay, we'll go to number 5. Intensive supervision. So I talked a little bit about law enforcement, so about probation. And, our probation never got any formal training whatsoever with treatment courts. So for them, it's just like a normal probation person coming in and checking in, right? So we're not, we didn't prepare them for some of the things, because when they come, they would get comfortable with probation. And probation people are really cool at Fort Peck, so they want to sit and talk with them, but we didn't tell probation, like, how do you react to that? Like, hey, they just told me blah, blah, what do I do with that? Like, is it something that should be reported? Do I tell the team? So making sure that your probation, okay, they're providing the supervision, but what does that look like? Because they may be confided in, and what do they expect probation to do with that information? And what type of supervision? I mean, is it just, straight drug testing? Is it scram? What are you going to use for the clients? And I can actually say that because of the specialty courts that we have, because we have family healing, juvenile healing, we have a truancy court, we have DUI court, we have a DV docket with the offender accountability program and victim services. And am I missing one, you guys? I feel like I am. But we have all of this going on besides court. Which one? Am I missing one? Okay. I think I got them all. But we have all this going on besides regular court going on every day. So we decided, and then social services uses our probation for drug testing. Some of the other tribal programs use it. The state sends people over. The feds send people over for probation check-ins. And we have all, this going on over here. So we've tried to narrow it down to, okay, we're gonna give them this time slot, but sometimes it doesn't work because probation is doing something else. So figuring out their schedule, that didn't come to us till later. And then also giving them training. What is it that they need to know that's going to be different from what they do every day with drug testing? But we also invested some money into our drug testing. What is it called, Munchie? The program that we got. It's because they were doing it by hand. Everything was written by hand. Everything was on paper. So we got a software system in place.
Management information system.
Yep. And it's just like courts have a CMS, right? It's their CMS, their case management system. And they just had to do the test, input the information, then they could print it out, then they could do reports, and there was none of this paper all over the place and, scrambling to figure out, and then probation, doing their reports based off what they have. So and also the sharing information, because there's HIPAA, okay, who does that apply to? What kind of information is HIPAA? So having those internal trainings, mandatory reporters, okay, what if they tell me something? Do I have to report that? Like, is that required to me? You know, those were one of the two things that we kind of had to get down with everybody is mandatory reporting, HIPAA. And we still have to go through that because some people will say, oh, that's HIPAA, and we're like, no, that's not. You know, so we're like, okay, we all need to be on the same page. So those are some of the things, part of your policy, maybe you want it in there. Having the confidentiality agreement signed, you know, making sure that the client is allowing us to get information from other entities and case management. So some of you that have coordinators, and this was kind of a big thing for us when you're applying for grants. You know, you have to have all these positions down. So we applied for a coordinator and then we realized, okay, maybe we should apply for a coordinator and a case manager because although your team is case managing, there's a lot going on with every individual where if you're coordinating and you're case managing and maybe you're even helping probation do the check-ins, you know, it can become overwhelming. So looking at what positions are very important, pertinent, what could you do without when you're looking at developing and moving or applying for grants because CTES and Sounds I think already has theirs out, but grant season is coming up. And even for the state, like state applies for grants too, I'm sure. You guys apply for so we do that like internally. We have grant writers, but sometimes we do it ourselves. So we have to look at what is it that what are our wants and our needs? You know, what's the difference? And so for intensive supervision, how many of you have people that go out to them? Like they go to their house or they check on them nights and weekends? Does anybody have that? Some of you do? Okay. And so, you know, that's something you want to look at. You want your probation to have a flex schedule. You want them to be able to go out during that time period. You know, what is the tribe going to allow? And, you know, what are some things that may prevent you from straight up walking into somebody's house and saying, I'm here to check on you. You know, even if they gave you permission, maybe it's not their house. You know, so having maybe your prosecutors, public defenders look at that. Part two to see, you know, what, if you're pushing the limits or you get in trouble, how much supervision are you going to give? Okay, responding to perceived behavior. So we talked about the incentives and sanctions. For those of you that are active with your court, do you do the ratio that he talked about where it's like, is it 4-to-1 for every one sanction you should have 4 incentives? How many of you follow that right now? How many of you try to follow that? Right? Okay. So it's difficult. It's difficult to do that because, like we heard earlier, like we're responding to the bad behavior. We say it's bad behavior, but we're responding to that. And I even catch myself doing this too. I'm like, okay, let's talk about the good stuff and the recognition and all of this before we go into what everybody didn't do, what they should have done, and being able to pull out those good things no matter how small they are. They checked in on time, you know, they showed up for their parenting class, you know, and when they complete, you know, reminding them that, hey, you got that done, you know, when you give them something else to do and it looks so hard, because at the very beginning, and we heard this earlier too, is you may be giving them 2 things to do, but in their mind, that's like 200 things because they cannot keep track. You know, we've tried calendars, write it down on your task sheet, giving them notes, they lose it, they don't bring it back. And it's almost like you need somebody with them 24/7 to remind them and tell them, my children, like do this every day, you know, pick up this, pick up that. But until they are in the mindset where they're able to take control of that, it's going to be like that. Some of them are like that for a long time. And you think of the effects that the drugs have had on them as well. You know, we've had drug-induced psychosis where they haven't completely come out of it, right? So they're struggling with trying to learn things, relearn things, like every day. You know, every day they're, okay, we're trying to get this in your mindset where it becomes, automatic memory to you, but they forget all the time. And it gets frustrating sometimes, but we have to remember, what they're going through when they're sobering up, when they're going through recovery, that there's so much more that's going on with them. So when they say, okay, well, you guys have so much to do, and we've had people come to us and say, okay, you guys give them all these things to do, how do you expect them to do this? And it's this sheet, right? And we're like, okay, they're only supposed to do these 2 things. Oh, well, they didn't tell me that. So they look at the sheet and like, oh yeah, it says it on there, okay. But to them, that whole sheet, they were supposed to do all that. And even though it's clearly marked on there, we're like, okay, how do we do this? Do we just individualize it every week and give it to them? Or do we use a sheet, like we're trying to save paper and we're not trying to have to do this individually every week because there's a lot to do during the week, and talking about it with them. So, how you structure that when they see like a page full of stuff and they just like, full blank, like, how am I gonna get all this stuff? And so the response to their behavior and getting yourself in, because there are times where you're just going to be frustrated with clients and they're not doing anything, we don't know what's going on with them, like, okay, when are we going to kick them off? Like, when are we going to terminate them? Like, how many chances are we going to give them? The team members are getting upset about it. And, we struggled with that at the beginning because, and the good and bad of it, so we have a center grant, it goes by numbers. Okay, so do we have this many clients during this time period? How many graduated? If you don't have a grant, that may or may not be important to you. I mean, if you want to put in for one, you want to keep those numbers. But it was really getting number focused to the point where it's stressing everybody out. Like, we're not graduating people, And we couldn't, right? They were relapsing, they had other issues come up. Family members were passing away, they dealt with it, by falling back. And so after COVID, so everybody's numbers look bad during COVID, and a lot of places were shut down. So after COVID, we came back, okay, let's get on everybody, they can come back, we're gonna try to push them, and we ended up graduating like 4 people at one time, which is a lot for us, because normally it's like 1 here, 1 there. So we ended up graduating 4, but the one in particular, she was a problem child, and she had been in there since, all right, you guys remind me, 2018 or 17? 18? That's how long, she just graduated this year.
Mm-hmm.
That's how long she had been in there. But I'm telling you, she had about 30 years of drug abuse under her belt, methamphetamine for most of that. I think it was like crank or crack back when she started using it, and it changed, like she educated us on the whole drug thing, right? So she had used since she was a teenager. So she used all these years. She'd come in, we're like, okay, don't be negative Nancy, don't be Debbie Downer, because all the other clients would be like, oh my God, she's at it again, But then he got used to her, just kind of blew her off, whatever. But we kept trying with her, and even I at times, like, we're just kicking her out, we're done with her, so, but we didn't, and I don't know what happened, but anyway, it turned, and she was adamant she was not going to treatment. She ended up going. She didn't last though. She came back and she said, you know what, I don't need treatment, I'm done with this. She said, I was scared of withdrawals, it wasn't even that bad, and I'm done with this. And so to this day, she's still sober. And when did we graduate her? Back in March? In March, I think it was, but she just stopped on her own. I mean, she did go to treatment, she went through the withdrawals, and then she came back and she did have kids on the line. That was the other thing, is like, you keep talking about you want your kids back, how important they are to you, but once she had that clarity without the drug in her system, she's like, what am I doing? Why have I wasted all these years? And she saw it, and we're like, okay, she's motivated now. So we stick with her, and she's still sober, and she's like, yeah, I got this, I can do this. And I was so proud of her when she graduated because she got her kids back. She actually had them with her at graduation, and she the thing about her, even though she's on drugs all these years, like decades, right? She maintained a home. She still had a home. She cleaned, and she was one of our good cleaners. The one thing that she struggled with is like after she got sober, she was like, how did I feed my family? She said, because I don't have money for food. I'm hungry now. And she's like, what do I do? You know, so we had helped her with that, you know, finding resources and programs and things like that. She could work, she had no problem getting a job and working, but if we had given up on her, her children would be adopted outright. And they were about to be, you know, until she stopped using. And it was such a long time. We're like, this is the longest we've had somebody here. But prior to that, we did graduate somebody who was like 3 years in. And so we kept her. And so she's my example of, even on our bad days when we want to get rid of everybody, why we need to keep them in. And looking at the time period of the normal track, right? You're gonna see phases. And a lot of phases have, okay, this is the first 30 days, this is the next 60, this is the next 90. Those aren't gonna fit for everybody. And so those of you that have the, you know, you have the option to say, all right, we're gonna do it in phases, but there's no time period on it. That may work for you, because it works for us. Even though we had a time period on ours, because we had to when we applied for the grant, we modified it. And right, so we're saying, okay, it should be within this time frame, but you have to complete this. So no matter how long it takes you to get to that point, we're gonna keep you in there, in that phase. Is there anything that you want to add to this slide?
Let's see, that was 6. The only thing I would say is that I tell our coordinators, it's your job to make sure that you find the positive things that the participant is doing, because you have the probation officer in there, you have law enforcement in there, you have, who am I thinking? The prosecutor is in there, and they're all looking at, you know, what's this guy not doing, rather than what is he doing. And so I tell the coordinator, your job is to make sure that the positive things get pointed out, because they often get overlooked in the staffing. And everybody is doing something positive. You can always find something positive to complement the participant. You want to move on to 7,
Yeah, we'll move on to 7, and I think we have like 15 minutes left, but.
What is it, 1 o'clock we're supposed to be done?
Okay.
About 10.
Okay, so I'm gonna move through this one I'm just gonna move through real quick, because the judicial interaction, you know, the judges, there's a lot of resources out there, and what I had to learn is there's a thin line there between, you know, being the judge of court and being the judge of wellness court. And taking on too much and having too much close interaction with them, where they're coming to you instead of the people that they're supposed to be going to. And that had happened, and we end up, you know, kind of getting them back, okay, you know, you gotta contact them, you know, you gotta contact them. But judges getting training on that, you go to training, you even just read on the internet if you can't go anywhere. You know, there's booklets out there too that tells you, you know, this is the role of the judge. And sometimes in the smaller jurisdictions, in the smaller courts, you know, they're gonna have a closer interaction with the judge, just because they know you, they see you all the time, they see you for 3-4 years, you know, you're like relative at that point, so it's like, okay, well, you know, I'm gonna help you out, but you need to go see so-and-so. And not crossing those boundaries, because they will reach out to you for other things that aren't wellness court related, and you have to just tell them, I cannot talk to you about that. You know, that's outside of our area. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, only that, as Doug said this morning, often what you hear from participants is that this is the first time somebody in authority, you know, has paid attention to what my problems are and tried to help me. Because in the criminal justice system, that just doesn't happen, usually unless it's a drug court environment. And so that becomes very, very important to those individuals. When you hear them graduate, they will always talk about the judge paid attention to what my needs were, and really was helpful to me. And, on the other hand, they look to the judge as the authority figure. So you have to, as the judge said, there's a fine line there that a judge has to walk around, showing compassion, but also showing authority. They have to go hand in hand.
That is true, they really do appreciate having that attention on a one-on-one basis. And at graduation, they'll mention that too. Monitoring and evaluation, some of the courts require the peer review, whether it's annual or it's grant mandated sometimes. But having an outside person, and we had an individual come into ours, it's been years, but some of the stuff, the information that he took and showed to us, and we were talking about the measurements, we're like, oh my gosh, we did not even see that. And it's like, okay, so we know what we should be doing and we're not doing it. And now we see how it's affecting, certain parts of the program. And so those performance reviews, and Doug probably knows more people. I know one of the ladies you mentioned today, Andrea.
Andrea, yeah.
She's local Montana.
Yeah.
And she does that. There was another individual you mentioned.
Yeah.
Because you really do want somebody that is outside of your spectrum to look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. And the data I'm sure Yellowstone County does, because I've seen your data, but do any of the tribal courts collect data just for your own purposes or to use? And, that's become big in the grant world too, data, especially in Indian country, because you heard the numbers today, right? They had, talking about the incarceration of the, I think it's had African American and Caucasian on there. You hardly ever see that type of information from Native Americans, right? And you can search and search and search, but if you don't do it internally, you're never gonna know anything about your own tribe unless you do it yourself. And there's software out there, there's people that are for hire that do that, but one of the grants that we had put in for was specifically for data collection and to use it, but ours was more for VAWA. Ours was for special jurisdiction, but it gave us insight on other areas to include our DV docket and to include our offender accountability program, which is brand new. Normally federal government does not give money for offenders; it's always victims, right? So we jumped on that, we got it, and so having the offenders now, working with them and working with the victims, it's we graduated a lot of individuals from our domestic violence course. And it's interesting because they recognize things that they did not know was TV. They didn't know what that's like. My parents were fighting when I was young. That's just a thing. Like them hitting each other or whatever. To them it was not domestic violence. That was just a family thing. And so giving them those kind of tools to utilize throughout, because some of them are in other courts. They might be in that program, but they might be part of wellness court too, because we do referrals to those programs. So utilizing your own programs and resources can be beneficial too, but for the evaluation, looking for those tools, I think they have some on this website too, on the tribal law. Yeah, on tribal law and policy, one of these brochures, but I think it's just TLPI.org. TLPI.org, you can find a lot of resources on there. If you don't have the money to spend on that, you can read through here, and there's a lot of information in there. Okay, we'll go to number 9. Okay, community education. So, looking through, does anybody in here have a community like a CCR, like a coordinated community response program, or it's developed to involve communities to educate them on different programs or resources, And if you Google CCR, there's a lot of information in there too, but it's more of a huge, and talk about holistic, it brings in everybody. And so part of that coordinated community response in, tribal courts, okay, what is their function, what do they do? And what we wanna look at is what can we put back into the community? So whether it's individuals from the wellness court, or we go out and educate the communities, not just on wellness court, but everything else that's going on. So when you're talking about community education with your clients, getting them involved with something like that, where they're able to have their input, because they have good input. When we say, okay, what's wrong? What's going on? Like, after hours, what do you guys see? Like, what are the issues? Like, they'll tell you everything. They'll tell you names, places, like, they know everything, right? So they can give you a lot of good information that you can utilize to say, okay, tribes, this is what our issues are. We know it's drugs, but what exactly? Where are these drugs? Who's bringing them? Who's doing it? And one of the things I just want to say about that is, so we're having law enforcement as part of your court too. You have to be very firm that there is a line there. You cannot use my clients as confidential sources. You cannot say, oh, we're gonna debrief them, or hey, can we talk to them? Keeping them out of that, because you don't wanna put them back into the situation that they're trying to get out of, because I've heard of this happening before, I've actually seen it happen before, and it's like, no, you can't, don't give them the ultimatum either, like, if you don't help us, then we're gonna go tell the court that we caught you with a known drug dealer, something along those lines. So making sure that your law enforcement knows their role and what they should and shouldn't be doing with them, because we've had that happen. It was years and years and years ago, but it ended up being a bigger issue than what it was, because now this person is like trying to recover and get better and do all this, and they haven't testified in federal court. And so it's like, how does that benefit our program and the individual themselves? Anything that you want to cover on this?
Well, there's actually a Montana court case that says that information that was obtained during drug court cannot be used to prosecute the individual. That people, and the Montana Supreme Court said that information, the individual is told that information is confidential and will not be used to prosecute them. And so when somebody tried to do that, I think it was in Superior, Montana, the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You cannot prosecute that person with that information. So I was going to mention that there is a presentation, I think tomorrow, by a fellow by the name of Christopher Deutsch from NADCP that will talk about a media toolkit, so that if you want to promote your drug court, your Healing to Wellness court, that might be a session that you want to participate in.
And that should be a part of your policy when you're talking about agreements and confidentiality, what can be shared and what can't be shared, especially you're bringing in other programs, entities and agencies outside of what you're familiar with. Okay, number 10, team interaction. Okay, so team meetings, how often is your team gonna meet? What does that look like? So we actually still meet on Zoom, even if we're right next door to each other. Just because it's easier for us to get everybody on Zoom for just staffing, right? Just staffing. We do more in person, but the commitment, there's a lot, like our Indian Health Services, they can't commit to coming. They're so slammed that they're just not able to do it. But we're able to communicate with them. Like we have a form that we can send them if we're doing evaluations, and they know that they can, that form comes from the court, it goes directly to them, and it gets up on the list as immediate need. And so it's like emergency evaluations, they'll put them at the top of the list. So we have an agreement with them of how it's going to work, but they can't always commit to making the meetings, or they don't give us any individualized input during staffing when it comes to mental health. It's more of on their case plan, and it's worked through the coordinator and the team, whether they comply, didn't comply, they have a assessment set up, and did they do it, that type of thing. So knowing what information you're going to share with the team and not getting yourself in trouble with HIPAA for sure, but also in other areas with social services, because social services is part of our team as well, because we work with families, but sometimes it's not quite clear. Like Jeff stated, they might want to use information in the back court to say, they're not compliant, just in general, they're not compliant. So they'll call members to testify. Okay, what is it they can and can't testify to? They can say, yeah, they've checked in, they've done this, they've done that, but unless you're gonna get permission for those work results to be released, like, we don't release drug results outside of wellness court, and that's just part of our policy. And also part of our code, like, we codify that. Team interaction, anything else from you, Jeff?
No, the only thing I was gonna mention is the best practice standards say that you should have a steering committee and a community advisory board, which for small drug courts and rural drug courts and a lot of tribal drug courts is really hard to do, to have both. So our recommendation is that you have a steering and community committee that meets every 2 or 3 months, that includes the decision makers around some of the agencies that you deal with, as well as tribal council members, other key people in the community, your cultural director, so that they meet and they know what's going on in the drug court. You can present data to them. And, they only need to meet every 2 or 3 months, but there needs to be a link between the Healing to Wellness Court and the community. And so the best practice standards say to have that citizens advisory board.
And for tribes, if you have any other boards that are already in place,
Yeah,
you could probably use those, because that's what we do. We have a tribal justice coordinating committee, and they meet once a month. So they are like that advisory board, so we give them an update on what's going on in the court and then ask if they have any input. But normally, everybody there has had a piece of the team, so they're familiar with it. They know what should and shouldn't go on.
I think it's lunchtime.
Yeah, I think it's lunchtime. Thank you, guys. Thank you.